with yourself being such a acclaimed competitor,
Mm-hmm.
and I know a lot of women go through this, and men too. I've been talking a lot to people that I work with about being lean, right? And quite a lot, I'll say, you know, like, what do you want to look like, or where do you want to be from here? Because you want to change now, you know, that's why we're talking, type of thing. And they'll be like, well, I want to be, you know, how I was 3 years ago or 4 years ago. I was actually talking about this with my wife yesterday. I was like, man, if I competed, I don't think, like, I recently just lost a couple kilos because I had a baby and I was just like eating too much, whatever, not sleeping
Comfort
enough, blah,
eating.
blah, blah. Yeah, all that type of stuff. And I was like, oh man, like I want to just like lean down a bit. But I think if I competed, that would be on another level, and I would struggle with that. Looking at stage photos and being like, whoa, I was like 6%, 8%, whatever. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I've been competing since I was 21, so 15 years, that I've kind of learned a lot of the lessons that I've needed to not just think about how I am in this moment, but what's going to support me for my future goals. And the thing that I had to learn was to separate how I looked all the time from like what is needed to be done to build my future body. You know, because when I first started competing, that wasn't my ideal body. And even as I'm 36 now, this still isn't my ideal body. I'm still working on that. And I think the piece that a lot of people struggle with is we become so attached to this idea of this one thing. And not only are we so much more than our bodies, but the phases that are required for physical change, whether that be to improve our body composition, requires times where we might be a little bit uncomfortable. We might not be in this ideal state, but that is not forever. And so it's important to get really clear on like, what is the purpose of what we need to do? What is the purpose of each phase? And also respecting what is needed for each stage. So I've been 6% body fat and I've been 14% body fat, and there's still, 14% body fat's relatively low numbers, I must admit that.
That's putting up a good number still
Yes.
for an off-season.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the thing I'm most grateful for, Brock, is when I'm in a build, I couldn't give a shit about body fat accumulating. My most important thing is, am I building the muscle? Because that's the thing that takes a lot of time to do. And I think there's a massive misunderstanding around what is actually required of us to build muscle. We actually shouldn't get fat in a building phase. That means you've disrespected some part of the process. And I think a really beautiful journey for everyone to go on is learning to make small commitments to ourselves, learning how to follow a process, learning how to respect a process, and learning how to do hard things even when we don't want to do it. And isn't that like the epitome of discipline? So one, I unattach myself to how I look. One, because how I look on stage is not how I'm going to look forever. And obviously I've been through this experience, but a lot of the images that we look at on social media, they take a lot of work to maintain there. So unless you're willing to forego social outings, a very, a fun relationship with your partner or even your family, and you really want to isolate yourself and be very tied to a structure that is incredibly rigid, it's not where you're going to be the happiest. And we often hear this all the time. You might be like, well, I was leaner then, but I actually wasn't happy. And that's because there's a disconnect between what is going to give you fulfillment and what you see on the other side. And often, or like more times than not, there's just too much of an extreme barrier that's getting you to what you think you want to look like. And sometimes we have to go there to realize maybe it's not what we want, or is there a better way to achieve that particular look? And the more times that we can add a little bit more muscle under the belt, which takes time and years, getting to our dream physique gets easier later because we've also learned how to do the process better. We've got more experience and we've got a little bit more time under our belt. So right now I'm in a build. I'm getting a DEXA scan tomorrow and I'm really curious as to how much muscle I put on. But yeah, clothes fit a little bit tighter, but whatever. I just don't really, I'm grateful that it's not my sole purpose. My sole purpose is train with intent, look after my sleep, add progressive overload, train, to proximity to failure, and outperform myself every week, and let that over time, see the small, very small, subtle improvements over time to get me to where I want to be for my next show.
So how do you sell that to someone that doesn't understand that yet? Because I go through that, you go through that on a daily basis. I'd love to hear what your process is. It's kind of like turning that around, because they want to look lean and they want to I want to build muscle and lose fat, right? And that isn't like you don't just do that most of the time. It's has to be a cyclical process. But how do you go around selling them on that idea? Because they usually don't want to hear it, right? And then you're this coach that told them that they don't want to hear, and then they'll go to someone that sells them the dream. It's just full of bullshit. And then they're like, oh, and then they come back 3 months later. You're like, oh, I told you. How do you like change their mind around that?
Well, one of the questions I ask my clients is, what do you make that mean? And what I'm referring to is when they say, well, I'm going to put on body fat. It's like, cool. So what do you make that mean? And they'll be like, when they say it out loud, it's like, well, I just feel uncomfortable. I'm like, okay, so why is that important? Like, how is that changing your life, this discomfort that you have? And they'll share whatever it is. I'm like, is this the worst thing in the world that's going to happen to you? Like, no, but it's like, okay, so this thing that you want over here, right? And where you are now, the disconnect is your ability to remove yourself from this little bit of discomfort and follow through on these other things that are going to give you empowerment, like learning how to be okay with more food, learning how to outperform yourself. So something that we teach in train the female athlete is how to outperform yourself week to week, how to get strong, right? How to maximize your own training potential. Like, can we look at this path in a different perspective and not make it just about body fat? Because at the end of the day, if we remove all of the feelings, it's just a little bit of body fat. It actually doesn't mean anything other than the story that you've made it mean. So we can actually change that story, and we can actually come to learn that it isn't as bad as what we imagined it to be. And guess what? When we reach this point over here, fat loss is really easy. And so while it might have taken you 10 months to build a kilo of muscle, it's going to take you 10 weeks to lose any fat that the difference is so big. And, a really common thing that a lot of people say is, well, muscle weighs more than fat. That's not true. Pound for pound, gram for gram, kilo for kilo, it weighs the same. But the circumference of how much surface level it takes up on the body is really different. And so that 1 kilo of muscle that you've worked really, really hard to increase, you're not necessarily going to see visually until you do the fat loss phase, but you have to go through that phase first. And so I try and teach my clients, follow my process. Trust me, trust yourself, respect the process, and we're going to go through this as slowly as what we need to. So I generally start people at maintenance, and in that maintenance phase, we make sure that training effort is there, because we know that if training effort, and we're not like the training effort is a stimulus for growth. So for anyone listening, for anyone that does, okay, last set, best set, and then the other 2 sets were essentially warm-up sets, you're not going to grow your body, okay? All sets have to be hard. We should actually see a drop-off of reps per set as the accumulation of fatigue sets in, because you've given so much effort to the set before. That's what true training intensity is. And so that maintenance phase is, let's get clear on like what's actually keeping you the same. In terms of your calorie intake, you're showing me that you can follow a process. You show me that you've got a good relationship with your food here. You've shown me that you're training hard. We're seeing really good training effort and intensity. Okay, now we can pull the trigger and increase your calories just a little bit. Like literally for some people, it's like 150 grams a day, 150 calories a day. Some people it's up to 500, depending on the individual that I'm working with. But it is as slow as what we need to, because if you don't trust me, you're not trusting the process. And I think a really important piece here, if you're anyone that wants to build your body and you're scared, I highly recommend that you work with a coach, someone that you can trust, because it's nice to have someone on the other side that you can say, I'm struggling a little bit. Can you help me? And your coach will go as slow or as fast as you need to get the job done.